Hey, what's going on internet? This is Josh Noel from SonduckFilm, and in this video I want to give away 4 techniques to enhance your footage in post-production. That was actually 8, but who's counting? Alright, so you edited your project, you applied your color grading, and you're looking at your footage and you're like, I wish I could make my footage just a little bit better because I can't go back out and reshoot it, so what can I do here in post-production? So these 4 tips should point you in the right direction to enhance your footage. I don't suggest using all 4 for every clip, and I don't suggest even using any of them depending on the type of shots you have. I definitely challenge you to go and use these techniques and see if they work for your footage. They might not work for every shot, and in some cases they might look really good. And of course, I always suggest shooting everything as best as you can in camera because you don't really want to be fixing things in post-production, but these 4 techniques are more for enhancement, so hopefully these tips will work very well for you. In our first tip, we're going to create a depth of field, so we're going to separate our subject or object from the background and be able to blur our background individually from whatever we're focusing on. So we'll go ahead and jump into that and let's go check it out. Alright, so for our first technique, we're going to take a look at creating a depth of field here in After Effects. And this is going to be our primary shot where we're going to apply our examples to, and we'll be looking at 2 other shots throughout this video to see how these techniques apply up to other shots. So let's go ahead and let's get started on this camera blur techniques. The first thing you want to do is go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and you want to add the camera lens blur. Now this blur is amazing because it really emulates what it's like to shoot in camera, so you can really get some bokeh, and I'll show you in a second. And overall, you can see that this applies a nice blur overall to the image, and this is a way that we'll start creating our depth of field. You can adjust the blur radius. I'm going to set it down to 4, and you want to make sure that the blur effect is as subtle as possible. You don't want to overdo it or it'll look really bad. We'll check that out in a second. And make sure to check on repeat edge pixels. And then to retain the focus in a certain part of our shot, let's go ahead and duplicate our layer, delete the camera lens blur of the top layer, grab the pen tool, and start masking around the area that you want to keep in focus. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can see it's a very subtle mask. Now automatically you can see that the size of the shot are out of focus, but however, we still have sharpness here. And then what we can do to fix this, hit F on our keyboard for mask feather this out to probably about 200 to 400 pixels, and you can always refine the mask. And now a little before and after, we had our entire shot in focus because we stopped down all the way on our lens and everything was in focus. And now with the camera lens blur, we're able to drive our eyes to our subjects here. And if there's any movement in the shot, like camera movement or subject movement, you might have to keyframe the mask. So you just go to the mask path and you have to just move the mask over if there's any movement in the shot. That way you can follow the action. Now here's a shot that I don't think necessarily needs this effect. You can see it's very subtle, and it does blur out some of the foreground objects if you're not careful. But if you want that sort of thing, let's take a look at this effect. So if I increase the blur radius, you can see that it starts to create bokeh on the highlights of certain objects. And you can change the shape to whatever bokeh that you want. So if you want like a square, and you see that this changed to a square, you can also adjust the roundness if you want it just be pure circle. You can also adjust the aspect ratio, which I suggest going to about 2 or so, and then you can rotate this by a touch, and that creates very interesting bokeh. But as you can see now, we can't keep the blur level this high because now the shot is so unnatural, so we would want to keep this around a 4, and probably want to keep the shape somewhere above a hexagon. I'll probably go as far as an octagon. But this looks a little bit more natural, and this definitely drives eye attention to our subject. And you can see in the shot how it starts to create more character into highlights of this bokeh right here. It loses a texture, but it does kind of stretch it out as almost if it's anamorphic. For tip number 2, we're going to be adding our own custom film grain inside of After Effects. This might not look great on every shot that you've done, or maybe it will enhance. It's very subtle, so you're going to have to take a very detailed look to see if this works for you. But if you're going to add film grain and maybe make your footage look a little bit more filmic, this is how you would do it, and this is the exact settings to go about making it look amazing. And this is very important if you're going to be doing any compositing or any effects like we did with the blur here. And adding natural film grain can emulate a little bit of a film, even though it's still digital grain. And it might be something I just highly suggest taking a look at if you really want to adjust your image a little bit. But when we blurred all this out with this camera lens blur, we start to lose some of that grain in there because it's getting blurred out. So what you do is you create an adjustment layer, and then you go to Effect, Noise and Grain, and you're going to add the Add Grain effect, and you get this little box here. You set the viewing mode to final output, and you see this grains all over the image. This does look bad. What we can do is lower down the intensity. We'll set the intensity somewhere between 0.3 and 0.5, and it's definitely minimalized. And I like to set the aspect ratio to about 2 because that stretches out the grain a little bit more and makes it as if you shot it on an anamorphic lens. Then I like to come here into the application, and you can actually adjust where the grain's being seen. So I like to bring down the grain in the shadows a little bit, and this might be very hard to see. So a little before and after. So this is with the grain effect and without. And you can see just kind of a solid digital. There's no grain in this area, but we have too much grain when we turn this on. So we can bring down the shadows. So maybe I'll bring this down to 0.47. And it becomes very subtle. I don't know how well you can see this on YouTube, so this is why I definitely suggest you check this out on your own time. We can, if we want, increase the highlights if we would like to do that. And this is just very experimental, and depending on the type of shot you have, we'll bring down the midtones and, you know, automatically just a little before and after. I doubt you can see it only if I zoom in, but it does add a little extra aesthetic to the shot. It's really up to you. It might work for you or it might not. You know, here's a little bit extra film grain here on this shot. This is where I would definitely try to control the shadows as much as possible, and it does kind of smooth out. It does kind of break up her face a little bit, and over here you can really see in the background there. So just adds a little bit of subtleties to it. I would be very careful. Just a little bit of subtle grain can go a long way. Just a quick word from our sponsors over at Envato. If you're looking for any high quality After Effects templates, whether you're doing, you know, a slideshow or you need a logo sting, and of course these are all After Effects templates, meaning that they're pre-made, ready to go. All the work you're seeing right now are on VideoHive, and they have over 700 video effects in stock. So if you're working on an After Effects project in the realm of motion graphics, or if you need music for your project, go ahead and check our links in the video description if any of these links inspire you. So back to the video and let's keep going. So tip number 3, we're going to be looking at adding atmospherical elements, more specifically looking at adding lens flares. And you only want to add a lens flare to enhance your footage if there is a bright source of light, maybe outside of frame or even in your frame. You don't want to add a lens flare if there's not a dramatic light source anywhere around, like the sun's not present in the shot or off frame. You want to make sure that lens flare comes from a bright source of light. So here are the next part on the list. We're going to add a lens flare, and you can create a lens flare with optical flares from Video Copilot. I'm not going to use it because if you have it, you probably already know how to use it, but here's some stock lens flares. I'll provide a link in the description. There's many ways to get your hands on lens flares, but you can't create it naturally inside of After Effects because the built-in effect is terrible. But you apply your lens flare, you might have to set the blend mode to screen or add. I'll set it down the screen, and you see we can add a very natural lens flare in here. Now, this might be overly intense, and after a quick render here, this is definitely a little bit intense. If I was going for something very stylistic, this would probably work, and I think the lens flare is a little bit fast. Might not be the right pick, but I'm going to go with this one. And if your lens flare is really intense, make sure you lower the opacity by hitting T on your keyboard if you're using After Effects. And you lower the opacity on it to just blend it in there very subtly. So this is a very subtle add of a lens flare, and I'll be very careful with adding lens flares because you can kill your shot if it doesn't make sense. So like you're doing a corporate piece, it might not make sense, but if you're shooting like a wedding or some sort of short film narrative, this could definitely enhance your shot. So just use it sparingly. And of course for your lens flares, you can apply a color correction to help enhance the blending of everything, the compositing. So I might bring up the reds of this lens flare, bringing it down on the blues so it becomes a little bit more warm. And here's a lens flare that does not look good on the shot. This shot should not have a lens flare, and if there's any lens flare, it should probably come from this source of light, and there's no way you get a lens flare from this. For shots that don't make sense, don't apply a lens flare. In our third shot, I think the lens flare is fine, and color palette is everything. And the reason why this lens flare is okay is because it matches with our color palette of the shot. And there's a little bit of light motivation. I think you would get some more lens flare off camera here, but it's just really up to you if it works or not. And like I said, it doesn't work in every situation. And number 4 on our tip is adding camera shake in post-production. So you shot that tripod shot and you're just not feeling it. It's supposed to be a little bit more actiony. So you can add some very subtle camera shake in post-production to draw a little bit more attention to your shot and perhaps make it more exciting. But it's really up to you. This is how you would do that very subtly. As you can see, this shot is completely static on a shot on a tripod. And this technique, once again, doesn't make sense for every shot, but I think for this shot, it does make a lot of sense. So let's go here and grab all of our clips, and we want to pre-compose it by going layer, pre-compose, and then from here what we're going to do is hit P on our keyboard for position. We'll all click the stopwatch, and we're going to type in the expression wiggle, open parenthesis, 1, comma, 20, close parenthesis. And essentially what's happening here is you're going to get 1 wiggle per second, and it's going to affect the position by 20. Now you're going to get a little bit of camera shake here, but now you have to solve the edges here because you're moving up the shot up and down. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hit S on our keyboard for scale, and we can just scale this up to like 103 or 104%, depending on how much you need to do. It's a little bit trial and error. And now we've added a little bit of camera shake, and here it is applied to the overall image. I think this looks really good for this shot. Like, I think we really took the shot and took this to the next level. So here is the before and after. So here's our shot originally, completely in focus and sharp. And here is our after. And I definitely think we did enhance the shot by a little bit. It's really up to you about how many techniques you want to apply here, but it's all subjective. And here's an example where the camera shake might not make sense for a shot that's supposed to be intentionally tripod. does not look good, and you want to make sure when you do apply camera shake that it does make sense for your story that you're trying to tell. Over here, it just does not make sense for what we're doing, and sometimes it doesn't look natural. Alright, and for a bonus tip, just like PewDiePie doesn't do bonus meme anymore, I gotta do a bonus tip. And for a bonus tip, if you're gonna want to make your footage look like a widescreen format or anamorphic, if you're gonna do that letterboxing technique, don't create black bars on top of your footage. You want to be able to resize your composition to fit that widescreen format, because it's never going to be truly widescreen, at least from a technical standpoint, if you add black bars and render it in 1080p. Let me show you how to do that with After Effects. You can also do this in Premiere. Okay, so this is how most people apply widescreen. They'll create these 2 black bars in the shot, and then they can reframe their shot and all that. And this is not a good way at all. This is not true widescreen. This is just adding black bars to make your shot more cinematic. If you want to apply real widescreen, just forget all that. You can go up to your sequence settings, or you can go to composition settings, and you can bring down the height of your shot. So I'll bring it down to 800. This will be a 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. You'll see that right here. And of course, you can do this in Premiere and any other editing software. And now this will crop down our shot. And now this is legitimately widescreen. And now if they watch your video, say on YouTube, they're still going to see the black bars on the top, because YouTube is not a 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. But on Vimeo, the player will actually clamp down to just seeing the video without the black bars, unless they go full screen. Depending on how the viewer views it, there'll probably end up being black bars underneath it anyway, and this is the true widescreen format. Alright, those are my tips to enhance your footage in post-production. Like I said, every technique might not work for your video. Maybe none of them will, but maybe all of them will. So definitely take a look at experimenting with this if you really are in the need to enhance your footage in post-production. And for my last piece of advice, if you're going to apply any of these techniques, you want to make sure that any of the techniques that you use is subtle. You don't want the technique that you're applying to draw attention to itself if you overdid it, and that would probably make your shot look worse. So if you know what you're doing and you keep it to a minimum, I think you can really enhance your shot. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, SonduckFilm. We post 2 to 3 After Effects and filmmaking videos every single week. And hit me up on my social media networks. Those links are in the video description. And always be creating.